the Huskers held another press conference today.
Yeah. Yes, they did.
For a spring game that won't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it is spring practice.
I heard, I think I have this written down somewhere.
And remember, the important part of spring football has always been the practice, not the scrimmage game. In front of 70,000 people.
Dave Fight described everything. I'm trying to find it. It was basically because there won't be a game.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest loss with no spring game is speculation instead of analysis. And you and I have talked a lot about like how much was there really to learn from spring games anymore anyway. But I found that to be a really interesting way to describe maybe what the next 5 months are going to bring, where at least in the past, there was something to glom onto from the spring game. Look, I would say this. There were quarterback competitions where you kind of felt definitive going into the offseason. I would say, for example, Adrian Martinez's first spring game in 2018. I remember entering that thinking that Tristan Gebbia would win the battle, that he would perform really well in that spring game, that his, being a veteran would help him out. And we'd go into the offseason thinking, yeah, it's definitely going to be his job to lose. And actually the opposite happened. And we left the spring game thinking, oh, okay, well, barring something catastrophic happening, it will be Adrian Martinez's job. Sure enough, Tristan Gebbia leaves in mid-August, and an idiot hopped on the radio and said, you can throw eggs at me if he goes to Oregon State, to which he did.
He did.
We're not going to have that. And look, there's not a quarterback battle this year, so there wasn't going to be anything definitive in that regard. I think seeing the receivers would have been nice, Does Emmett Johnson look better? That would have been nice. Like, I guess the hardest part of spring games over the last few years was that the football it was devolving into something that really didn't resemble true football. Whereas in the Adrian era, I'd say it kind of was. He wasn't going to get touched, but it looked more like football than today's spring games do, I guess is the best way that I would describe it.
Yeah, I understand where Dave's coming from, but I have long maintained that the spring game wasn't a good indicator of what you can expect in the fall. And so we did, only because we saw it and we had nothing else to go off of, we leaned into it pretty hard in terms of crafting our vision for either that player or that unit on the team or that position group of how they would do in the upcoming season. And mainly because I have watched it very casually,
and you always have.
I'd say I watched it a lot closer, longer ago, but probably in the last 5 to 7 years. I mean, it's like never watched it live, but mainly because there was usually I had a baseball game to call or something. But even in the years where I didn't, I'd tape it, fast forward through the commercials, and if I got bored, I'd shut it off because you just don't get much out of it. So I don't think in reality we're going to have any better sense of this we had any better sense of this program
like last year, 2 years ago.
Year on May 1st than we will this year on May 1st. The sense that we have will be what it is, and that will all be crafted from what is said in these press conferences.
Yeah.
And maybe the little bit of, scrimmage that is, or not scrimmage, but practices that are open to the media.
Or the scrimmages that, if you have a source who's there, that you hear something from.
Sure. So
are we entering a new era then of college football where never before have we known less about a season before we entered the season?
I think you could.
Everybody.
Well, you could make the argument that maybe you know a little bit more from this point if you bring in guys from the portal who have done things elsewhere. It's like bringing in a free agent in the NFL. If you know what Joe Milton was with the New England Patriots, you kind of know what he's going to be with the Dallas Cowboys.
Bad. Not good.
I only mentioned that, but
the answer is not good. He will not be beating out Dak Prescott.
Right. But seriously, with a lot of the transfers that are coming in, there will be some expectations. There's expectations,
Dinky, for example.
There's expectations with the receiver group.
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Because they have done it before. And then, of course, with the guys like Dylan and those who are returning, I mean, really, you're probably going to know about as much as you've always known. I don't think it's going to be a whole lot more. I don't think it's going to be a whole lot less. Because remember, the only thing we're losing is a scrimmage that really wasn't the same kind of scrimmage that the coaches run behind closed doors.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we're losing. So
why is it holding such like this huge place in us?
Because
right
it's
now?
never happened before.
Yeah.
And it's like Ricky Bobby and I don't know what to do with my hands.
Maybe that is the best way to describe it.
That's really what it is, which is why, and I think Shafe might agree with me because Shafe and I have been kind of beating the drum of we don't miss this thing. We're not going to.
And for the record, I don't either. But
no,
yet I sense something different this spring than previous ones, even though nothing is to this point of spring. Nothing is different. It's only the last thing that is going to be different. But yet, I would say right now, through 6 practices, 7 practices, this spring seems different than previous springs. But maybe that is the knowledge that I have that it's not going to end like
correct. Because and I think that's why I'm not saying everybody did this, but there were some people that looked at the spring game as a game, and so every press conference that was held, every coach's availability, every player's availability before that was counting down to an inevitable thing that I get to see with my own eyes. Now, psychologically, that's gone. But you're correct. The availability today with Coach Thomas, with Jalen Gramstad, with Uncle Don, no different than the media availabilities that we got last year. And some of the things said may have not been a whole lot different. But psychologically, because that spring game doesn't exist, I think some people have been more apt to tune out saying, well, I'm not going to get a chance to see it, so kind of back away.
What are you going to
say? Something about like the death of nostalgia, too. You know, this was always just a thing. It was always kind of a staple, and it was always just there.
Yeah, now it's not.
And now it's like an appendix getting removed. You've always had it. You didn't need it, but now you know it's gone. I assume people who don't have their appendix feel different.
No, they don't.
You have a scar.
They don't feel different.
Yeah.
They don't feel
different.
You can just tell something's missing.
And I think I've said this to you, that I sense like a malaise this spring, and maybe that's just the usual buildup of another mediocre year, but that there is something missing from this offseason, and that's that they did go to a bowl game, but it wasn't good enough. And so there does seem to be this weird kind of apathy and, but I don't know, I think one of the hallmarks of the early part of the Rule era so far that I have sensed at least is there does seem to be this like a checking out in the offseason more than normal, or at least what I remember it being. But maybe it's just my brain being, reworked in a different way.
It's funny you mention that because when I was growing up, when I was going to college, we didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about spring football. We knew it was there. We knew the scrimmage was coming up. And if someone mentioned something about, a practice or how a guy's looking, it would be talked about, but it wasn't a big deal. And this is back during the 80s, when Nebraska was always good and there was always excitement. Our priorities have changed because we didn't have talk radio. We didn't have the internet. Sure, the Tom Chattels of their day or the Steve Sipples of their day would cover spring practice and people would absorb it, but it'd be just kind of
like 2 papers.
It'd be like, hey, I read the newspaper today. I found out what the city council did. I saw what happened on the crime beat, and then I went about my day.
Yeah. Not to keep going back to
it's different now because now we have entities outlets like ours who live off of this beast 24/7, 365, inside the season, outside the season.
And so going back to, and I don't mean to keep doing it this week, but it has been interesting to me, like what Jacob was saying when he was on with Gary and Matt on Monday. If that is part of it, because you're right. Back when you're a teenager or even in college, there are 2 big newspapers in the state that you would have access to, given that you lived in Lincoln. There wasn't sports talk radio in the same, nowhere near the same sense of now. There certainly weren't going to be podcasts, and there wasn't going to be internet. So the only way you could really follow the team in terms of like the daily stuff, it was just a couple of random articles with some quotes.
Yeah.
And, you know,
it's whatever Lee had from practice or Steve Pivovar or, you know, or Kurt McKeever, you know, that was it.
Yeah.
And we kind of took it in, but then that was all.
Yeah.
And then moved about our day. It's very different now because you could really say this. It's not just a football thing, but around here it's mainly football because it is the most popular sport. But every sport's like that. Every sport's like that. We have networks dedicated to the NFL 365 days a year.
Yeah.
We have MLB
NFL
channel. We have NHL network.
Yeah.
We have the NBA TV. We have outlets that keep the fire burning all year round.
Mm-hmm.
When, you know, once upon a time, it was kind of like the Olympics. The torch is lit, the Olympics are going on. Torch is extinguished, no more Olympics. We move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Now, the torch is always lit.
Well, isn't that why you always talk about your seasons? Because I think when you were growing up, it was way easier to do the seasons thing. Whereas now it's...
It was nice to unplug and just kind of move on to the next thing.
Meanwhile, I can now go home and every day there is a Dallas Cowboys podcast from people that I enjoy every day during the week. 5 days a week, there is at least one podcast in my feed. The Athletic NFL beat writers, they cover the Cowboys multiple times a week. Like, so every day I can go home and I can read something about them. I can listen to something about them. And it was not always that way. Definitely not always that way. Max writes, do you guys think the lack of care for no spring game has a lot to do with the state of the program? I can't help but imagine if they were 9+ wins the last couple of years and competed for conference championships and such, then there would be a lot more desire for a spring game. And then he adds, definitely feel the apathy this spring. It'll pick up as the season gets closer for sure, but still.
You would almost think there would be a little more fervor or want for a spring game after last season. Yeah, they went 6-6, but that's the first time they've done that in forever.
Yeah, but I think the way it happened, not all 6-win teams are,
right.
It was that they started 5-1, but then finished with a whimper.
Yeah.
It didn't quite.
It wasn't the season people hoped it to be.
No.
If you would have said a year ago, right now, they're going to start 5-1, people would have been like, wow, really? Like, that sounds awesome. And even in the midst of the 5-1 start, people weren't that happy. The Colorado game was a fun first half, and then it was, meh. Northern Iowa, meh. Purdue was an ugly game. Rutgers was an ugly game. Like, so even as they kept winning at the end of that streak, they weren't doing so in an appeasing way.
So then how the hell do people think that they're going to feel satisfied when all these other lesser schools keep getting scheduled instead of the Tennessees of the world?
Well, because they're hoping that they'll win by more points.
They just want wins.
And they'll, that a 6-win regular season turns into an 8 or 9-win regular season.
Right. But this is where I get confused about the fan base, because the fan base, they just want wins. There's this group that we just want wins no matter the cost, but then they get the wins, and then suddenly it's like, well, they weren't good wins, but what do you want then?
Yeah.
What do you want?
It's a great point. Because we do end up projecting, don't we? We look at a team and we won, but man, when we play team X, it's going to be bad. And so it affects your mood instead of just, and it's kind of always been that way with football because you only have 12 opportunities.
Season,
and so it feels like every one matters. It's not just that you win, it's how you win. It's one of the reasons why I love baseball.
You have a bad day?
Because you can get thumped 19-2 one day.
Got a game tomorrow.
And come back the next day and win 7-5, and all of a sudden all is well.
Yeah. Or if you're Nebraska, you just keep losing every day.
Whereas in football, if
Oregon
you get
State
thumped 56-10,
that lingers.
It lingers because there is no game the next day, and it couches the whole conversation for an entire week.
Well, speaking of lingering, I think Max brings up another excellent point on YouTube. That Iowa loss was so big. That game was going to set the tone for the offseason no matter what, and they lost it in the absolute worst way. They played another game after that, but they had a chance to really, to basically say, that middle part of the year that sucked, We fixed that. We fixed the glitch. We got rid of that coordinator you didn't like. We brought in Holgerson. Matt Rule picked up he beat Wisconsin, the first coach to do so since 12.
Yeah.
And then he got his first win over Iowa, and he did so in back-to-back weeks. He did so in back-to-back games. Not only are they going to a bowl, they're going to a bowl that people are going to be excited for with warm weather in Florida.
Wow.
They were up 10-0.
Max, I did not think of it that way because beating Iowa would not really have changed. I mean, they probably wouldn't have ended up in the Pinstripe Bowl, but they still would have ended up in a Pinstripe-like bowl. So it didn't mean anything in terms of...
They would have played Bama. They would have taken Michigan's spot, I believe, and played Bama down in Tampa.
Possibly, but in the moment, we didn't know that.
Sure, because, yeah, you're right. Michigan hadn't beaten Ohio State.
So we wouldn't have known.
Remember? And they beat Ohio State.
Remember when the Eagles won the
But this kind of rounds back to what we talked about earlier in the Grum regarding the crown and, can any of this mean anything towards next year? Is it possible that Iowa game could, even with a win, even if it ends up 7-5, and let's just say for argument's sake, Nebraska goes to a different bowl game, but loses that bowl game. So they still end up 7-6.
Yeah.
Does that Iowa game have that kind of lingering effect?
So they get the win over the rival, but they still lose the bowl game. I would think so, just because it's a win over a team that you haven't beaten a whole lot lately. And you did it on the road. And you did it in year 1 or year 2, but year 1 of Holgerson.
But I think what Max is arguing is if you beat Iowa, then you win the bowl game. Now you're 8-5, which certainly looks better than 7-6.
Yeah.
But you have the warm and fuzzy good feels of we beat Iowa. And I think, and again, this is going back to the how. It wasn't that they lost to Iowa.
That's how they lost.
It was the how they lost to Iowa because it was the same script from what seems like every Iowa game in the last 6 years, 7 years, 8 years.
10 years.
It was the same script. It didn't feel any... You could have squinted your eyes and thought Scott Frost was on the sideline. You could have squinted your eyes and thought that Mike Riley was on the sideline. You could have squinted your eyes and thought that Bo Pelini was on the sideline. Because it happened the same stinking way.
Aaron texts in, Max is right. I remember how I basically quit giving a bleep and still haven't really come back. LOL. I obviously care, but I've divorced myself from Husker football.
Interesting. Again, even with that win, it doesn't really improve Nebraska's season.
But psychologically. Yeah, it would have done something.
I wish there was a way we could formulate it in terms of a poll question. Because I'd be curious to know how many people feel this way.
Yeah.
If, and maybe this is the question. Did the Iowa result water down, this may not be the way to phrase it, but did it water down your excitement level this offseason?
Yeah. Is it still hanging over the place?
Is it really not over the place, but is it hanging over you?
Over you
this
as
is
a person.
Question.
That's true. You're right.
This is a question for you, the people.
As an individual.
Did the Iowa game and the result of the Iowa game change how you are approaching this offseason and how you are absorbing the offseason, taking in the information, allowing yourself to either be excited or are you more pessimist or more show me because of the Iowa game? There's a better way to phrase this whole thing, but I wonder if Max and Aaron
are onto
something here. Because I'll be honest with you, and again, I watched the Iowa game and it was a chuckle only because, oh my God, it's happening again.
They're doing it again.
Right.
They've done it again.
You want to talk about Charlie Brown and getting the football pulled. That's what that was.
Oh, it definitely was.
And it's one of those, oh, dang it, I should have seen this coming. Of course it was going to end this way.
Did the Iowa loss kill your enthusiasm for the Husker offseason?
The Aaron text of divorcing himself from the offseason, I think is interesting. I think Lee hits on something that I've thought about a lot too, and it's funny, and you'll see why. I think a big part too with this is there has not been any big changes over the offseason. OC isn't new. DC has a game under his belt, so we saw him. No new QB. Isn't it wild? And I've made this argument. If Holgerson is hired a month later, I think the conversation is so different because he is an unknown. But now we know him, even though you only know him for 4 games. And I think that oddly
man, I would hope that people are
know.
doing that because.
But we wasted all of the new guy material in November, and we went over some of it the other day.
But if anything, if you think about this,
that should be better for this season.
Yes, if you think about this logically. In fact,
what's logic?
Glenn Thomas talked about it today. He said the transition. I'm reading from Robin, who was able to somehow miraculously cover this press conference in Las Vegas.
God, he's amazing.
He is an amazing reporter. But in his synopsis of what Glenn Thomas said, he said, Thomas said the transition from Dana Holgerson as the OC was a blessing for Nebraska. It was, quote, unique timing, but that allowed the Huskers to be, quote, so much ahead of where they would be as an offense if Holgerson had taken over in January.
Holgo the Oko.
So, I mean, because that's the way I think. It's like, well, isn't it cool that they got this 4-game tryout for him just to kind of get the feel of the place?
Got to learn the players.
Find
out their skills.
And
fire tiny baby boys.
And instead of coming in January and having to change everything around and spend part of spring football installing, the installation to a great degree has already happened. Certainly the way they had to rush through it wasn't optimal. But they did get the head start.
Yeah.
And so you would think, like Glenn Thomas said, hey, this is a blessing for us.
Yeah.
That this would be exciting. But because of the psychology of, but it's not a new
He's not a new guy.
And unfortunately, they only went 2-2 in the games that he was the offensive coordinator.
Even though I think I thought the offense was different. It was just that it was still all the same players.
Sure.
But I thought it looked better. I thought the play calling was more imaginative. I thought they were moving the ball better. They certainly had one of their best performances in the Matt Rule era against Wisconsin.
Interesting.
A couple more comments before we go to break. Chris says, I bet that if you ask 100 Husker fans if they would rather have the win versus Iowa or the bowl win, they would take the Iowa win. Yeah, and that's certainly
but I mean, yeah, because Iowa's a rival.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, the Boston College win, it was important from the
I don't believe it.
It was important from the standpoint of it avoided them going 6-7. But if they had beaten Iowa, they would have been 7-5 going into the bowl game.
This is a take I had the other day. I don't think we should count postseason.
That was a
season record.
hot take when you were gone on Tuesday.
Well, they do count.
Sorry, Nick. Legally, they have to count them.
They do count.
And then Katie says, you wasted your March material in November. Maybe Bigelow was right, you bunch of grifters. Interesting rabbit hole we found ourselves going down with this one. Thank you, Max.
Interesting rabbit hole indeed.
Wow, in Husker country, and this is an entirely different discussion. I'd forgotten how we lost that game. It's the fact that college football players are now paid employees. That usurps my enthusiasm. That is obviously, you want to talk about psychologically. That's something I totally don't understand, but I do think it's out there. Now, do I think that's why this spring feels malaise? I don't think so, but maybe I'm just projecting my own opinions and feelings on it.
Oh, believe me.
That's out there.
The patience and I'm not shaming it, by the way. The patience that people will now have for college athletes because they get paid is going to be a lot shorter.
And that's fine.
But guess what? That's the price you pay when you get paid.
Yeah, and again, that's fine.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
I just don't
understand not liking it because they get paid. That's the part that I just cannot wrap my brain around. How that changes. Like there's
not liking the
product, feeling like I don't like it. I watch the games now and I know they're paid. And so it somehow changes what you feel like the product is. But that's me. I've never cared about the amateur ideal, but I've also, John, I've been saying, I know that players were getting stuff under the table. Mm-hmm. I never had this romanticism of, and they're doing it for the love. No, a lot of them sure are, but others were not doing it for the love. They were doing it because they got money to come to your school.
Yeah.
And
But
that's always been the case.
That is a hard thing for people to get over.
I know.
Because especially when you come from a market like this that is so identifiable with the team. It's like the state's collective psyche and reputation rode on the record of the football team, and it's been that way for generations. And there was a concept that people, they won here, they won for us.
Yeah.
And now
not for cash.
And now it feels like it's more, well, this is a business decision. He's here because he's getting paid more than he would have gotten somewhere else. And that is, and I understand that is for some people a hard concept to get over.
The illusion was shattered.
Mm-hmm. So I do understand it. I'm with you, but also remember, a lot of people in this state, not all, but a lot, are just Husker fans.
Yeah.
They don't follow a lot of other sports. They don't have a baseball team. They don't have an NBA team. They don't have a pro team. They're just Husker fans. Their connection to sports might be their local high school and the Huskers, and that's it.
Yeah.
And, if you come from more of a background, especially if you have a pro background, I'm used to it, man. Greg Maddux left the Cubs. Pissed me off. I hate it. You hate your Greg Maddux. You left because of the money, you greedy sucker. But that was...
Bill Simmons called Roger Clemens the Antichrist one time because he went to the Blue Jays.
But that was
time.
That was the pro sports mindset.
We should call people Antichrist more often.
That was the pro sports
I think we
mindset.
should. I think we should call them as we see them.
All right. Well, time to talk about UCF football.